Rachel Service is my name, but you know that by now, and I'm the CEO of Happiness Concierge, the company that is creating world-class culture across the globe. Happiness Concierge is celebrating our 5th birthday this year, and we've been privileged and honoured to work with the largest organisations across Australia. Throughout these organisations, and we won't be naming any organisations by name through our case studies today, we've noticed a lot of commonalities, and we've distilled that into 5 critical criteria, which is what we'll share with you today. Fun fact, regardless of industry, size, organisational scope or budget, the commonalities are all the same. So I just want to reassure you that while you might be having challenges or nuances, or you might be excited, regardless of what budget you have, your resources, your goals, the commonalities around developing a world-class culture are very common across all industries. I don't know about you, but as a CEO, I found that oddly reassuring. So today we're going to talk about what makes a world-class culture, a framework to take home, and then a game plan. So before we start, culture is a fun word. Some might call it a buzzword. How do you define culture? What would be your thoughts? Yep, great. A group, positive thinking mindset. Love that, love that. What else? And there's no wrong answers, which is the cool thing. A vibe. A vibe. Love that, love that. Yep, culture can be a vibe. Spot on. Collaboration. Yes, love that.
Shared values.
Shared values. High five to that. Love that, love that.
Just how you do things.
How you do things as a group. Oh, I love that, I love that. 2 more, because I like you. What else is culture?
Something you're immersed in.
You're immersed in, yeah. And that you contribute to and you're a part of, and that you endorse. Yeah. What else might culture be?
Evolving.
Evolving? Yes, that's the word of the day, evolving. Thank you. Yes, Mars bar for you. Culture is evolving. It's not a set and forget process. Wouldn't that be nice? And there's not a magic pill. I'd be a billionaire if there was one. It is an ongoing process, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So there's no wrong way to define culture, but how I define it, is around a DNA, how you do business. So the DNA might consist of what we stand for, our values in action being our ways of working, behaviours, our ways of working, how we do things, a vibe as a result of doing things, and sentiment, how our team experience work. How our team experience work. How many people leaders here in the room, just for context? Yep. How many people a member of a team being led by others? Yep. Half and half, pretty 50-50. Hey, welcome, nice to see you again. So the sentiment of how our team experience work is the lens that we're going to apply here when we talk about world-class culture. We can have the best of intentions. We all have the best of intentions, the best resourcing, the best strategy in the world. At the end of the day, our team's reality is the reality that defines our culture. And when we talk about a DNA of an organisation, the internal culture of an organisation influences the confidence of our team, our investors, our leaders, our stakeholders, our reputation. So when people say, culture, why is that important? Why should I bother? Well, it's about confidence in your brand, confidence in your reputation, and ultimately consumer confidence. People who purchase or invest or ignite in your brand are confident in what you do. Does that make sense? Yeah. And from a performance piece, studies have shown that culture inadvertently influences performance. And in some terms, it can take up to 4 years before that is the case. But we'll step through those case studies here today. There we go. When I think about culture, I really think about this. Culture consists of a value. So the value in this example here might be, as a family, we have dinner together. That's the value. And technically that value, welcome, nice to see you. Technically that value is happening here. The behaviour is, we have dinner as a family and we're on our phones. So the value is an action, technically, and the behaviour is, but we're on our phones. Welcome to modern ways of eating and dining. And the sentiment of the people who are experiencing, for the case of this analogy, to adults having dinner and the child in this scenario observing, what's the sentiment of that child in this instance? I'm not rewarded?
Important.
I'm not important. Spot on. And what communicates that? And what impression might he get of his adults in that scenario? Behaviour isn't matching the values. Spot on. Yep, spot on. He's going to ask for a phone for Christmas because he wants to be, because everyone's doing it. Spot on. We become what we see, and those newest to our organisation are most influenced by our existing behaviours. So there's a lot we can take from this, right, isn't there? What we want to do, what we actually do, and how others experience what we do. How others experience what we do ultimately influences stepping outside the organisation, go with me, how confident they are about their inside organisation and what they say to consumers, to their partner, to potential investors, to stakeholders, you name it. Because what people say on a Sunday around barbecue with their closest, nearest and dearest is how they truly feel about their 9 to 5 or their workplace, isn't it? And we know the influencing factors around attracting talent, best practice, and bringing your best self to work is influenced by what happens around the barbecue. So I want you to think about today, what might I say about my workplace around a barbecue with my nearest and dearest, or maybe after a glass of wine, and how might I be enabling that, or does that align with where I'm at? And if it's not, fantastic. Let's talk about aligning those things together. I'm not here to say that there is one way and not another way. All I am here to say is that we have a conscious choice that we can make to positively influence our working environments. And if we could do that, why wouldn't we? To as much as we can influence. So how is world-class culture created? Through our work together across Australia and indeed the globe, welcome, across the last 5 years, we've discovered that there are 3 factors which interlink and influence each other, and this is why culture can feel complex, but it needn't be. The first point here is cultural norms, as defined by a Google study titled Project Aristotle, which surveyed 180 high-performing teams. They discovered that it wasn't an individual superstar or high performer that influenced performance. It was in fact cultural norms. The idea of what is normal around here, the vibe, the behaviour, the sentiment, influence how people worked and whether they're more likely to be efficient than an individual performer. So as an example, let's say a high performer turns up at 6 a.m, gets their work done and then leaves at 4 p.m. And let's say there's another cultural norm of, well, we could come in early, but that's not really how we do things around here, and who's early to meetings anyway, and yada, yada, yada. Eventually the high performer will become influenced by that culture, that they might become that culture, or they might find somewhere else where they can be the 6 a.m. bright star. So I think it's very easy to talk about high performance as an individual piece, and that absolutely is the case, especially for leaders, but ultimately what is normal around an organisation has greater influence. Isn't that wild? I found it really interesting. So what that means as a people leader is that we can have the best of intentions, but if it's not typical or normal being relative, that's a wonderful thing about that word, it will have less of an impact. When we talk about leadership behaviours, that is, are we doing what we're saying? Are we acting in ways that enable our values? And you know, there's a lot to do as a leader, and behaviours is just one of them. But just know that our team are more likely to observe what we do from, take a sentiment of work from what we do rather than what we say. So while perception and communicating our expectations is critical, ultimately it's how we enable that and how we reward, endorse, or let people go that influences how our team experience work. And I know that both from experience and from speaking to seasoned leaders. And the third part of this is the individual capability. That we have the competency, that is a skill level, that we're conscious of our competency rather than unconsciously incompetent, which is to not know that we're competent at our job because of the feedback piece. And that belief that we can control outcomes, as defined in 1954 by psychologist Julian Rotter, the internal locus of control, that is the belief that we can control outcomes. So the cultural norms and the leadership behaviours and the individual capability all together create world-class culture. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's our effort to distill our learnings into a very simple yet really effective framework. So I want to go back to this slide here about expectations and reality. So I've given you a simple and effective framework. And on paper, it should look like this, right? And yet for some reason, Happiness Concierge is still in business, for one, it comes out like this. So why is that? Why is culture, sometimes we want it to look like that, but it feels like this? Why is that? Do you have any ideas? Change is hard, spot on. Yeah, why is change so hard? Spot on. So we don't love change as individuals, and probably we're still at the organisation because there's a part of us that actually suits the way of working. We may not like it or love it, but it might actually suit, because when we are influenced by behaviours, we revert to the lowest common denominator in work and in relationships too. So yeah, it's worth thinking about. Yeah. So we're given this expectation, but we're never given the tools or taught how. Yep, 100%, 100%. What else? Yep, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? The fear. We're scared of change, so we do what we can. We throw at the wall, hoping some of it sticks, and praying that no one asks us about it. Yeah, I'm not solely speaking from my own experience here as a leader too. Yeah. One more. Yeah. We all have different values, challenges, expectations, personality types, preferences, things we like to do, things we don't like to do, people we like to talk to, coffee orders, and we all wonder why we can't get it. We find it challenging to make it consistent. That's right. Spot on. Spot on. So at Happiness Concierge, we've devoted our life, our work to understanding this, and spent 5 years undergoing primary research across 3 continents. Been getting on a few planes. It's been good fun. Interviewing C-suite leaders to understand what their challenges are, off the record using depersonalization of data, and the data of 180 teams across every industry. And there are 5 commonalities that we've discovered which stops people from living the expectation piece. And I hope to reassure you by sharing these with you. The number 1 piece is recognition. Recognition. Isn't that interesting? Why do we think that recognition might be the number 1 challenge of enabling world-class culture? Makes people feel like they belong. Yep. And ultimately, we turn up somewhere every day to feel a part of something, don't we? Even if it's the commonality of grumbling about it, we want to feel a part of it, don't we? Yep, spot on. So what we discovered in our primary research is that acts of informal, like, you rock, nice job, I see you, recognition, coupled with formal recognition, performance appraisals, verbally at a town hall, communicating internally from internal communications, for example, or an award ceremony, had greater influence than reward programs alone. And by specifically what I mean by that is, as opposed to reward programs that are solely, say, commission-based, or status and title-based, or visibility-based, acts of small, bite-sized breadcrumb recognition delivered consistently, I see you, I value, I trust you, I appreciate you, thank you, went so much further than solely traditional formalized processes. Both play a part for different personality types, but both working out together. The reason we know this is through performance data, but also because there are 2 sides of Happiness Concierge business, which gives us a really great duality to look at. The first place is the workplace training program, which is what we're talking about today. The flip side is our coaching work-life brilliance program, where individuals who are seeking more out of their life come to us and say, you know, my work's great, I get paid well, I don't mind it, it's just that I don't feel valued. And that's the number 1 piece from all of our coaching clients over the last 5 years. I'm not looking for a job. I mean, I'm open to an opportunity. I'm not actively seeking, but I just don't feel like they value me. And so when we work with them to communicate about how we might showcase our wins to get a bit of that recognition, often the need to go elsewhere dissipates because we don't really have an interest in going elsewhere. We just want to feel seen and recognized. 100%, 100%. So the same as of relationships, whether it's romantic or professional, you want to feel seen and valued. And like, you're number 1, right? Or is that just me? Yeah. So it sounds as though communicating expectations, when we do celebrate a win, are we both aligned that that is a win? And is your version of success different from my version of success? That is spot on. How can we make sure that we're clear on what our shared version of success looks like? The way we get there will be very different, but what does done look like? And what does a shared success look like? Yep. How many of you would feel comfortable having a conversation with your direct lead or your team to say, hey, let's get clear on what shared success looks like? Yes, I'm getting a lot of nods. I am loving that. Yeah, so it is possible. So the second piece is feedback culture. Feedback culture. Uncertainty around feedback created communication vacuums which indirectly affected performance. So there are three parts to this, the reason why it's challenging. So often the leaders in our care, the senior ones especially, avoid giving feedback because they worry it'll come out wrong, that it'll either be overtly aggressive or passive aggressive. And then we kind of hope in the middle that it's somehow assertive and clear and not personal, close to and very challenging to do. So the senior leaders avoid giving feedback because that's challenging. The individuals who do receive feedback receive either very direct or feedback that they take home and process and maybe don't show up as a result because they're not sure what that really means. Yeah? And then the third part to that is people coming in within the organisation go, it sounds like I need to focus on politics more than performance here. Because we perceive feedback as a negative thing, don't we? As opposed to its intended purpose, which is to feed it forward. And that is to help support a goal of an individual. I see you have a goal. I'd like to help you achieve that goal. To reward a behaviour. I saw that you acted in our cultural norms way of working or our values. Love that. Or to pivot a behaviour. Hey, I saw that you did that today just to let you know that's not how we do things. Instead, try this. And so without that framework, we don't do it. We don't do it. In fact, in an Are You OK study, which was completed by 1,500 individuals, 56% felt that their manager were incapable of providing clear guidance or specific feedback during challenging times. At Happiness Concierge, we say, manage the work, lead the people, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. So it's not all bad news. That's why it's challenging. Number three, this one here. When words and actions differ, the behaviours of leaders had greater influence on people's performance than the words on the wall or in a company brochure. If we're saying one thing and doing another, the integrity is lost. And the three critical factors which influence the most are the following. Whether a leader is present in the room with you, in their one-on-ones, or committed, going, yeah, that is tough. Let's figure that out. The leader is present with you. Number two, whether you and the leader or your manager are aligned on the same strategy, same goal, and this one, expectations. And number three, whether the leadership team are aligned and lead within the team, and when they're outside of the room, support each other. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. That's some light-hearted notes to think about. And then number fourth, the trust piece. Sound judgment and followed through influence whether people trusted their leaders. In a study of 87,000 leaders, it was discovered that the three traits which most positively influenced trust were number one, positive behaviour, positive relationships. Number two, judgment. Judgment and expertise. What I say about a colleague when they're not in the room. What I do when things don't go to plan. How I show up when I'm being put on the spot. That judgment piece. And whether I know how to use my expertise at the right place at the right time. Am I utilising my skill set? And this one here, bit dull but pretty important, and consistency. I'm doing what I say I will do every day. And as a leader and as a manager, that's the work, right? So we're hearing they're a leader who shows up 80% of the time, consistently, calmly, clearly, confidently, and then 10, 20% of the time during times of stress, welcome to modern ways of working, that communication style, you can see the stress. And as a result, as a team member, you're sensing, can I trust this person because of their behaving is different from what I expect? Isn't that interesting? Studies have shown that people would rather a consistently crappy leader, because it's consistent, right? Than an inconsistent superstar who occasionally lets it known that they're feeling the stress. And that's so challenging as any alive human, right? That's really challenging. And so knowing the intent, knowing the integrity, and also the past record of your colleagues to say, hey, you don't seem like yourself. Do you want a minute? Or this isn't like your usual self. Are you okay? That takes work. And if you are not the leader or manager, that's often a power dynamic, which is really tricky to say, how do you say that to your team member? And the most important part, do you want to? Do I accept this person with all their loves and highs and lows and flaws? But as a leader, the consistency piece is the most challenging part. I know that from experience in the leaders that we speak to, because hello, welcome to being alive. And also the most important part. So how many of you discovered that you sat on the under 50 mark? Yeah, cool. There's no right or wrong. Yeah. How many of you discovered you're under the 75 mark? Yeah, so the majority of the room. Amazing. Love that. How many of you found that you're under 100? Yep, Mars bar for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 Mars bars. How good's that? For the majority of this room who sits on the under 75 mark, think about these 5 criteria. How might we, as Google would say in their Project Aristotle finding, develop the #1 factor for influencing high performance in teams, that being psychological safety. Psychological safety being, I feel safe to ask for help. If I stuff up, someone will help me and I won't have the finger pointed at me. I'll own up, but I won't feel too bad about it. How might we promote constructive modes of communicating, both managing upwards, both managing stakeholders, and of course, giving and receiving feedback, the lifelong art form. How might we align with the world-class culture framework to take us from good to great? And how might we develop a culture of accountability? The values on the walls and the actions. And this one here, how might we create a shared understanding of effective working zones? As we discovered earlier, some of us thrive under fast-paced environments. Others of us love a bit of stress. And others, when something doesn't go to plans, we go into our red zone. And that can really shake people around us. There's no right or wrong, but once we know that, we can take actions towards that. And if we're sitting under the 51, that's actually a much smaller list, because the bigger the gap, the smaller the action steps. If you are sitting under the lower mark, that's great. How might we enable a culture of psychological safety? #2, how might we promote constructive modes of communicating and cultivate efficient and effective ways of working? So the majority of organisations would sit here, and then these groups here, the lists are lower because where there is refinement to do, you want to make small tweaks, and where there is refinement to do at a lower level, you want to make small steps towards action. So if you look at this graph over here, you'll see that change is a gradual process. For sure. To answer your first question, yes, organisations at all sizes benefit from the world-class culture framework, for one. For #2, how do you raise it to the attention if you might be under the 50 category, or there might not be a dialogue or an appetite or an awareness? The first start with any change or evolution or alignment is indeed that alignment. Are we clear on where we would like to go? And is there awareness for the way that we're working might not serve us for where we are going? So aligning our future goals with our current goals would be the first way to do that. And the second part of that is, what is our relationship like with these key stakeholders who make that decisions, and what is my influence range? How might they perceive my suggestion? How might they receive that? Because the art of any influence is that it must be someone else's idea for them to make change, right? Yeah. I love it when my partner makes something my idea. I feel pretty good, more likely to do it or whatever. So there's that piece there. And then there's also about, if this is where I would like to go from a personal level, what's the reality of my organisation? And where might their limitations be compared to mine? So often, particularly those of us who have big hearts and are passionate about this stuff, would love to renovate an entire organisation. The practicality of that is that the organisation might think that actually the sandpit we're playing in here, it's all right. So how do we maximise that sandpit, if you will? Does that make sense? So getting clear of what is and out of our control, what we can and can't influence, and how can we maximise what we can influence, and then develop those relationships and plant those seeds. Yeah, some of the best ideas that have come to me from the team have been little seeds planted over time. And at sometimes I haven't got capacity to think about it, and other times I think, oh, that's great. Thank goodness someone else is thinking about that. This one here, this is from the behaviour gap. One can either make massive change and then go, oh, and then discover that there is less likelihood of uptake, or one can make gradual small changes. You might use the word change, or you might use the word tweak or upgrade, up to you based on your cultural norms. And with those small changes, we're more likely to make a small adaptation and go back and reflect on how far we've come together as a recognition piece.